Hola a todos. My name is Elizabeth Smith, and I'm the Cultural Affairs Officer here at the U.S. Embassy in Costa Rica. I'm delighted to welcome you to this series of webinars made possible through the dedicated efforts of the experienced educators at the Institute for Collaborative Learning, the Ministry of Public Education, and the U.S. Embassy. Teaching English is both a rewarding and challenging task, requiring continuous growth, adaptation, and learning. These webinars will serve as a valuable platform to expand your knowledge, exchange ideas, and explore new, innovative methodologies. Together, you will reach new levels in your teaching practice and inspire your students to excel in English. I encourage you all to actively engage, to participate wholeheartedly, and to share your own experiences and perspectives. By collaborating with one another, you can build a vibrant network of English teachers in Costa Rica, united by a common goal to inspire your students and shape their futures through the power of language. I cannot thank you enough for your hard work and dedication to your profession. On behalf of the U.S. Embassy in Costa Rica, I welcome you again, and may this series of webinars be a productive and interesting experience for you. Buena suerte en su proceso de aprendizaje. Adelante.
A continuación vamos a tener palabras de bienvenida también de la doctora Gisela Alpizar Elizondo, quien es jefa del Departamento de Educación de la Primera Infancia del Ministerio de Educación Pública en Costa Rica, MEP. Adelante, doctora Alpizar.
Muy buenas tardes para todos y todas, para doña Mary, para don Matthew, para don Iván, este equipo de primera infancia que lidera los procesos, ¿verdad? Desde el ámbito del inglés, para mi compañero Colton, que bueno, es nuestro compañero que desde la embajada nos apoyan con un recurso tan valioso, y para todas las docentes y asesores que se han mantenido en hoy, el tercer webinario, ¿verdad? Sobre el rol integrador del docente en el uso de la tecnología como un recurso más, ¿verdad? Para el aprendizaje. ¿Para qué? Para potenciar pues, competencias lingüísticas y hacer de nuestras prácticas pedagógicas ya utilizando, pues teniendo herramientas valiosas para poder implementar un uso de la tecnología de manera intencionada, que eso es lo que queremos, ¿verdad? Prácticas pedagógicas pues más creativas, con intencionalidad y que busquen calidad. Así es que agradecerles por haber estado acá, a que aprovechen estos especialistas, ¿verdad? Que con toda su experticia nos vienen a enriquecer. Y bueno, que este día de hoy sea de verdad un espacio de desarrollo profesional exitoso y bien aprovechado. Así es que muy buenas tardes y gracias por la oportunidad de podernos enriquecer con todos sus conocimientos.
Muchísimas gracias, doctora Gisela Alpizar Elizondo, por sus palabras de bienvenida e inspiración para los participantes. Next, I'm going to switch into English. And next, we have Mary Shaw, also doing the welcoming words on behalf of the I4CL team. Mary.
Welcome, everybody. Thanks, Yvonne, and thank you, Dr. Alpizar. Welcome, everybody. Thank you all for coming. For those of you watching the video, thank you for watching the video. Thank you for taking time for your own professional development. We also want to offer great deep thanks to the U.S. Embassy in Costa Rica for sponsoring these webinars and for all the work they do to support English language learning and teaching in the country. And a huge thank you to Ofelia and Doctora Alpizar for all of the support from the Ministry of Public Education for creating these webinars. We're super excited. Today's especially thinking about technology is something that is on all of our minds, and technology as a tool, not as a replacement, as a tool, an enhancement to the work that we do. So we're excited to have Matt Schaefer with us again today, offering this webinar. Matt, why don't you just take it away?
Well, welcome everyone. I'm so glad you're all here for the Learning, Playing, and Screening webinar. Today we're going to be looking into the integral role of the teacher and the use of technology with preschool learners. So exactly as Mary was saying, how we can take advantage of a tool for learning and interact with that tool in a way that's playful and fun, but also deeply grounded in the learning that we want to guide our young learners to. Alrighty, I'd like to start us off with a technology-inspired community builder. So I want you all, educators out there, to think about using technology in your classrooms. How do you feel? Feel free to answer with an emoji. You can use one of the ones on the screen that I've chosen or any other one you can find as well. But when you have to use technology in the classroom, either in person or online, how does that make you feel? Do you feel like a technology ninja, a technology rock star, a painter, a yogi, a weightlifter? What does it feel like using technology in the classroom? Mary shares she feels like a juggler. Yeah, I often feel like when I want my attention so focused on my students, I also have this thing like technology that needs some attention. And so I'm kind of tossing between those things. Colton shares an emoji of a chef, maybe a connection there too, thinking about having different dishes across the stove or oven, but also that kind of artistic scientific fusion that comes together there. Anna shares in chat, a scientist experimenting. Ophelia, a genie with a lamp, making magic happen. I feel like for me, my experience using technology in the classroom, I could never choose just one emoji, right? I feel like some days it definitely feels like that weightlifter, right? I'm just forcing everything to work and it's just a real struggle. But sometimes I feel like that more magical genie, like I'm just making something incredible happen. Sometimes I feel like the technology is this thing between me and my students. And sometimes I feel like technology gives me a stage to connect with my learners and their learning. So I feel like all these different ones and different moments in time. Thanks all for sharing there. Well, I want to give you all a brief overview of our webinar series and where we're at. This is our final of 3 webinars designed specifically about the teaching of preschoolers. So we've already had a workshop on linguistic competency, as well as assessing learning. And both of those recordings of webinars will be available soon on our resource site. So if you weren't able to join us live, soon you'll have access to a recording of each of those webinars, and you can watch the webinar, fill out an attendance sheet afterwards, and it'll be just like you were with us. You'll get to do all of the interacting and let us know that you were there. And also coming up in June and July, we have 3 more webinars that are open for all teachers of all ages. So look out for the links through your typical MEP channels or how you're connected with us at the Institute for Collaborative Learning. And we'd love to continue connecting with you all. Again, all of these webinars, we offer each session several times. So you can come to whichever one session is most convenient, but don't feel like you have to come to all 4 different well-being in the classroom sessions. Unless you're really feeling like you need some well-being, and then come hang out. So, hi everyone, I'm Matt. For those of you who are joining for the first time, it's nice to meet you. And you can call me just Matt, not Professor, Mr., or Sir, just Matt. And I believe in promoting sustainable habits of learning that empower learners to guide themselves as they play, build, explore, and create their futures. That's, to me, words that I would say really guide a lot of the decisions I have to make in the classroom. If I see 2 different ways of facilitating an activity, I might ask myself, does one of these directions give more space to empower learners to guide themselves? Maybe it's a slightly slower path, but if we can learn a little bit more autonomy, maybe it will feel more playful, more exploratory, and more creative. And so I just want to share with you, that's where I'm coming at this. I see technology as a tool I can use in my pursuit of this belief, right? I don't believe in technology per se, right? This is what I believe about learning. And I think just like all the other things and strategies I know, technology can be one of the tools that helps me promote this kind of sustainable and ongoing learning. So here's a quick overview of today. So we'll start off with an opening discussion there. We'll think a little bit about the science of serious play And I want to share with you some research about how play is an academic strategy and a structure of learning. I think especially working in the preschool and young learner classrooms, understanding how to create moments that are playful, but also serious and focused on learning is a really important Venn diagram to be in the middle of. Because our learners at this age want to play, and we as their educators want them to learn. So when we can infuse those two things, I think is where we'll find some of the most successes. Afterwards, we'll think about the different depths that we can integrate technology into our classrooms, and make sure that as we're bringing technology in, we're thinking about what level do we feel comfortable with, and what level do we have the resources to integrate technology into our lessons and activities. We'll also take a moment to think about the risks of technology and make sure that we're not doing something just because it's shiny and new, but because it's genuinely going to be a benefit to our learners' experience. And finally, we'll think about screening as a skill. If we're raising a generation of students who can speak, listen to, read, and write in English, what about the skill of screening? How do we want to develop these young learners' ability to use technology so that as they're growing to become global citizens, they're armed with the language, technology, and social skills needed to participate in that global digital community? So that's what we're headed for today, and I'm excited to get there with you. And I'd like to open up a little bit of space for a starting discussion and hear where you all are at. I'm curious, now that we've had some time to settle into a post-pandemic rhythm of learning, how are you integrating technology into your process of learning? Maybe you're back in the classroom after some time distance learning. How has technology come with you? Or like me, maybe you've gone almost entirely online and it's become a much more integral part of your connection. But how does technology work into your day-to-day? Is it something you use for a few activities here and there? Maybe you use it mostly for homework, something you do once in a while. How often or to what extent do you use technology in your teaching? Feel free to let us know in chat. Feel free to unmute and share out loud.
Hi, Matt.
Hi there, Anna.
Okay, I usually use technology for homework and also to ask my students to do activities before the lesson so they can go on working in class. For example, with videos or activities for pre-listening or pre-reading activities. Also, since I focus on a subject that is phonetics, I give them some online lab sessions so that they can practice their pronunciation and I can check them, their pronunciation also, and give them feedback using some tools. I prefer to give them oral feedback, so I use a lot of talk and comment, the extension of Chrome. So that is the way I'm using it now. Because we also have exams at the same time as we are in class. So I use technology to compensate, let's say.
Nice, thanks for sharing, Anna. It sounds like you've really got technology integrated throughout the process of learning, right? From flipping learning and having students interacting with new content to doing some controlled practice activities and even doing some continuation homework afterwards. So that's exciting to learn. I also really connected when you were sharing about how for you giving feedback orally is really important. On a project I'm working on, I've slowly created a culture between one of my colleagues and myself of using WhatsApp voice notes. I feel like that process of just talking back and forth to one another asynchronously has really helped me feel personal in my professional connections. And so I feel like that's a technology that I really like using in that asynchronous communication. And so hearing how that works for you in terms of sharing feedback on assignments, I can also hear how hearing the voice of someone I know offering me feedback on my pronunciation might be something I can catch more softly than just reading it in black and white, when I can hear your tone and the care and the time you put into sending that message. In chat, Maylene adds that in her preschool classroom, she uses videos with songs, plays some games, and then also creates some flashcards with her learners. So it sounds like a lot of different input there, creating some rich multimedia so students have things to see and hear at the same time. Nice.
I think that it was a challenge after the pandemics to go on using technology, because it's been like 1.5 years, more or less, in front of the screens. So students kind of preferred not to use technology. It was like
Interesting.
weird. Yes, but I think that they had this feeling of tiredness. So I had to look for ways to motivate them to use technology, and to motivate myself also, because when you see that students are demotivated, you have to find a way to make it more appealing, maybe, even though technology is appealing when you know how to use it. But when there is like this emotional situation or process going on, it's yes, more challenging. Not impossible, but different.
Anna, you bridged us really nicely into the next topic I wanted to think about, which are what are some of the challenges? And I think you worded that nicely, that as technology is becoming more integrated in the classroom, it's also becoming more integrated everywhere, right? So there's also this feeling of potential burnout, right? We don't necessarily want to be using technology in every single moment. Even if we're in an online classroom, to make every moment this high tech, new bells and whistles flying at you, because it can become overwhelming. It can feel most in line with everything else going on. I think the more that life has moved online, the more I've gained a new appreciation for books as a technology. I felt like when I can teach in a classroom that has books in it, when my students come in, it's like this new thing, right? The energy of something that I don't have that at home, It's, coming to school and necessarily just having a tablet there. Maybe for some of the students, that's what they don't have at home. But as that's becoming a more normalized part of the day-to-day, that just that shiny new it factor might glance off. And so I think as we're thinking about these experiences working with different technologies, I think a lot of this same concept could apply to something like, how am I going to integrate a paper book? And just thinking about, because at one point that was technology for delivering a story to people, right? And thinking also about how we can balance that overload. That's one of the challenges I've been thinking a lot is I don't want to just come up here for 2 hours and talk to you all and say, use more technology, right? I don't know if you asked me, what do our 3 and 4-year-olds need? The right answer is more screen time, right? I don't know all of them, but I would doubt if that's the one thing they need more than anything else. And so I want to think, how can we be more intentional and not just more in volume in terms of using technology, right? Maybe to use less technology, but use it more focused. Alrighty, last question before we move forward. Giovanna's also sharing in chat that she uses a lot of videos to help students develop vocabulary through singing songs and combining that with movements or stories to create some moments of total physical response. And then also maybe using technology to play some games around vocabulary. Yeah, that's definitely one of the ideas I want to talk about later that some teachers were sharing with me. Is there any fantastical treasure from my magic box that would make teaching technology in your classroom even easier? I have a magic box and it's got everything in it. So anything you could request from this magical box that might make integrating technology in your classroom easier, let me know. And I'll look inside the box and see if we can get it for you. For me, here's what I want. An hourglass that like glass thing, you flip it over, the sand goes down. I'd like an hourglass, so like 60-minute timer made of sand. And whenever I flip it over, I'm just guaranteed to have perfect Wi-Fi for the next 60 minutes. Like I think as an online teacher, if at least just once a day, I could be like, this is my webinar, it's really important. If I could just flip that over and go, no Wi-Fi problems for 60 minutes, that would be a fantastical treasure that would make my integration of technology, I feel like a level of worry would come off of me.
The devices, maybe.
Hi, and so like a classroom set of devices, absolutely.
Yes.
Right. One of the things we'll be thinking about today is what can we do when we don't have a piece of technology for every student, right? When there's some things we can do if every child has a book or every child has a tablet, and there are some things we can't do. So what can we do in both of those situations, right? Just a basic level of access.
I would say also critical thinking. To integrate technology successfully to the classroom.
Nice. So thinking about like things you could take out that would help develop the critical thinking skills. I definitely want to think a little bit later about how critical thinking integrates with technology and that space of learning and playing we're trying to create. Alrighty, y'all. Well, now I want to talk to you about play. Right? Learning, playing, and screening. So before we connect to technology, I want to just connect a little bit with play. But Matt, why play, you ask? Well, data from Cambridge University research estimates that how long does it take to learn a language, right? The estimate is somewhere between 1,000 to 1,500 quality hours for a school-aged child to reach a functional level. And that's in a supportive learning environment. So if everything is working in school, right? They're in the same school, they have quality teachers, the class sizes are right, they get all their books, they don't lose taste during summer, right? They have some kind of continuing education program, 1,000 to 1,500 hours. And a research review from the University of Calgary corroborated this learning theory from Erickson that to really become an expert with someone, to achieve true expertise, you need around 10,000 hours. So to go from functional to expert, we're thinking somewhere between 1 and 10,000 hours that it's going to take to learn a language. Now, none of the students that I work with, I'm going to get to work with them for 1,000 hours, right? If I have them for a year, I might get several hundred hours, right? Maybe I'm their full-time classroom teacher and I get some more of that. But in terms of quality hours of English instruction, I'm only ever going to be a small portion of the overall process of learning that this student needs to go through. So I think knowing that that's my role is to accompany this student for this small portion of this very big journey. I think that as an educator, one of my biggest responsibilities is to help make sure my learners leave my class with the energy and motivation to keep learning, right? I like to imagine that they all come in with this little candle lit, and I'm trying to keep that candle of motivation lit throughout the whole year so that they can keep learning. Because the only way we're ever going to get to this functional level of language use or approaching expertise is to really sustain learning over a long period of time. Right? Play is one of the ways that I make learning sustainable. Sustainable is a word that I've been thinking about a lot more as I'm teaching, right? I'm thinking about a more abstract version of that same physical concept, right? When we're thinking about sustainability in the scientific world, we're thinking that when you measure the energy going in and the energy going out, there's a balance so that things can keep on going. Right? We're not using more resource than we're taking in. And so when I think about that in terms of learning, I think I need to finish the process of learning with the same amount of energy that I started, right? If I finish and I'm exhausted, I can only do that so many days in a row before I have to give up. And if every single day I go to school, I always go home feeling exhausted, I'm not going to have this kind of sustainable ongoing experience that's going to get me here. So when I'm creating my learning environment, I think creating an environment that's playful and keeps everything light with low risk and low stakes, I think that's one of the ways to keep that energy level of learning sustainable. And I also think it ties into ideas we've been talking about before of scaffolding learning, right? Because when I started doing some research into play, I found a lot of science here. If we dig back to Lev Vygotsky's studies, all of the starting research that later became the zone of proximal development was Lev Vygotsky watching children play, right? And seeing that how in play, younger children would learn from older children. They would see things done for them, modeled, acted out, or played. And through just the process of watching someone slightly older than you learn what's going on, right? As this group of preschoolers plays family and Sammy is reading to Ava, playing mom, 2-year-old Berenice, who's half the age of Sammy, is learning pre-literacy skills just by watching on. And so Vygotsky found that there was this type of socio-dramatic play, and that's where the most rich learning happened. That when play involved some kind of imaginary situation and players were acting out roles, and those roles gave them rules, that became socio-dramatic play where the most learning was happening, right? It wasn't just random running around and shouting, but there were moments when play elevated to this level. And as Lev said, in play, a child is always above his average age, above her daily behavior. In play, it is as though they were a head taller than themselves, trying to jump above the level of their normal behavior. And I really like that. I like that concept of aspirational learning that's going on through play. Because I think that space, that zone of proximal development can feel challenging. Being asked to do something that's slightly too hard can feel uncomfortable. But in play, where you're feeling taller than yourself, it helps you jump up to that higher level. So in researching some of Lev Vygotsky's studies, I found one of his colleagues doing research in Russia at the same time, a much less well-known, but in my opinion, even more inspiring writer. And that was Daniel Elkinen. And Daniel Elkinen was studying on these same playgrounds as Vygotsky, seeing how do children learn? When left alone, what does the process of learning look like? And they both agreed that learning took the form of play for children. But Elkinen built on Vygotsky's ideas. Elkinen went on to say, there isn't just good play and bad play. There's different layers of complexity in play. And the more complex that some kind of playful activity might be, the more that learning might be happening. So at its lowest level, play could just be a logical action. This is the kind of play, if you've ever been riding on a bus and a child looks over at you and you see them and you just go, and you make a funny face and they laugh, and then you go, and then they laugh again, and then you go, and they laugh again. This is just a logical action, right? There's no reason you're doing it. There's not a structure to the game, winners, losers, turn taking. It's just, I do something funny, you respond by laughing. This is the lowest complexity level of play. It's nice. It involves social interaction and social cues, but this is where the least amount of learning and serious play is going on. Now, once we start naming our actions, there becomes another layer of logic on top there. For me, layer 2 is when children play chase. You're it, and then we run away, right? Now there's an action and we're describing it. Let's play hide and seek. I'm going to hide, you're going to look for me, right? As the game or what they're playing becomes more complex, It challenges children's minds to work harder, and they end up learning more. Beyond that, we can move into logical and role-based action, right? Let's say students say, let's play house. I'm the mom, you're the dad, he's the brother, you're the sister, right? Now what they're doing is defined by these roles. Oh, you can't go to the kitchen and cook the food, you're the baby, right? And so as this new layer of complexity where there's defined roles is added on, now young learners are also starting to learn that process of relating to one another through roles, figuring out one's own position in a structure of relationship. And finally, the most complex layer of play involved this role-based playing where there was social regulation. Your students are on the playground. They're playing cops and robbers. The cops catch the robbers. They lock them up in the bottom of the play. But then the robbers get bored being locked up. And so they run away. And then everyone gets mad. You weren't supposed to do that. You were locked with it. That discussion, that argument that's going on right there, that's social regulation, right? That's children having a talk about what's the right thing to do in a playful moment right there, where you're creating a fantastic morality or a fantastic set of situations. And so the more complex the situation, the more the learning that's going on. So as we're thinking about how learning and playing can integrate with technology, I think technology can sometimes add a layer of complexity while also adding on a dynamic nature of play. It's going to make this higher order thinking happen. And just like Elkanan would say that a child is going to learn more by this socio-dramatic play of imagining a family with their friends than they're going to learn from just making funny faces, that the more cognitively challenging activity of playing while together with friends and using a shared tablet in the center might create that higher complexity where more learning is going to happen. Oh, I misattributed this. This is a quote from Elkanan. Sorry, Vygotsky, your friend said it first. Elkanan said, by imitating adults in play, children learn to adjust their actions to meet the norms associated with the behaviors of role models, thus practicing planning, self-modeling, and reflection, essential for intentional behaviors. So to me, there's a lot of big words in that sentence, but the way I sum it up is a lot of these really challenging skills that sometimes in preschool I think are so abstract. How do I help a 3 or 4-year-old learn to self-monitor, right? To control their own actions and words? How do I help them plan out how they're going to move across the classroom or plan out how they're going to put their materials away and work towards that kind of really intentional behavior? And Elkanan found that this type of interactive, playful environment was a space where students would engage in learning that. So that's my other spiel for play. I think it ties in a lot of the pro-social skills that we're trying to help our learners learn as they learn language. Alrighty. So now I want to take play and squeeze in the technology. How can we integrate technology into our classrooms in different ways? And once we figure out, okay, this is how the technology fits, then facilitate it in a playful manner. So this next piece is, how could technology fit into your classroom? And I'm hoping to approach this in a way that works for everyone here, even though we're all teaching in different classrooms with different resources, different students, and different learner needs. So depending on your situation, you might find that different layers of integration are going to work better for you. So I want you to treat this next section like window shopping. I'm going to talk about 4 different layers of integrating technology. How deeply is technology integrated in your classroom? And I want you to listen and do some window shopping and decide which 1 or 2 of these layers do you think is going to fit best as you integrate technology into your classroom. This is the SAMR model, and it comes from Ruben Plantadura Puente Vibra. And it's 4 different layers for how deeply technology is integrated. So we're going to talk through these and think about what they might mean and how they might connect to our context. But overall, we're thinking about technology that is a substitution for analog means, technology that's an augmentation, technology that's a modification, or technology that's a redefinition. So the lowest level of integration is substitution. When we use technology as a substitute, we're basically saying, this device, I'm going to use it the same way I would use this non-technological device. One example of this, I have the Dog Man series of graphic novels. If you've ever not heard of Dog Man, highly recommended. They're very language light and exciting graphic novels by Dave Pilkey, the author of Captain Underpants. And I wanted these books, but I was living and teaching in rural Costa Rica. And there was no bookstore near me where I could buy an English book. Even if I had the money for it, there weren't any in my whole canton. And so I used my iPad and I downloaded the book onto my device. And then I just brought the iPad in front of the classroom and flipped through it like it was a book. I didn't do anything different. If I had had the paper book, the moment would have been exactly the same for the students. That's a layer of integrating technology that I'd call substitution, right? We're doing something the same way we would as without technology. There's just a step easier in terms of access or finding something. Another example of this might be pulling up YouTube and playing songs, right? That's the same thing we might have done 10 years ago, but we might have used an audio CD of sounds for the ESL classroom, or 20 years ago with a cassette tape, right? And so the media is changing, but the actual process the student is going through isn't any different. Now, this is nice. Substitution can help solve problems. For me, in my rural classroom, this solved the problem of access. I actually found that I could go online to many free library websites, register for accounts, and download English children's books absolutely free and just click through them, right? So I've been able to use technology as a substitution to get a lot of books into my classroom. But this kind of technology integration, just like that lowest level of play, is the least complex. And so when I'm doing this, it's going to help me overcome challenges of access to information, but it's not going to help the students develop their technological literacy or their critical thinking, right? I really need to go beyond just showing a video to think this is technology that's becoming really interactive, right? Because I think that's what's really exciting about something like this. And what makes this different than a television. Because a television is a one-way communication device, right? All of the sound and light comes out this way. But when I've got this, not only is sound and light coming out, but my input is going in. My light is going back in the camera. My sound is going in the microphone. This is two-way communication happening here. And so just like in the classroom, because the medium is more interactive, my students can interact more with it. And if I just stop at substitution, I'm not going to get that. My students can't interact with an iPad and an ebook any differently than they could if I'm just reading out of a paper book. Now, I can still create great interaction in that moment, but it's not going to come just because I'm using technology. I've got to ask questions as I'm reading this book and myself use my voice to add the interaction, right? So the second level of integration of technology is augmentation. I'd consider augmentation when the teacher uses technology to make some aspect more efficient or effective. One example of this might be a teacher sending audio recordings of the pronunciation of new words to families to practice at home together over the weekend, This is a strategy I'd use a lot in my preschool classrooms. Whenever I would design all of my worksheets to be games that students could play. So first we color in the fruits, and then we roll a dice and we play some kind of game with the worksheet they made. We'd practice playing in the classroom, and then I'd send it home to the parents and families. And in our WhatsApp group, I would point my camera at the worksheet and record a video, while in Spanish, I would explain how to play the game, and in English, I would practice pronouncing the words. Now, the student was also going to take the paper home. If one of the parents of my children never saw the video, never heard the audio, everything's going to be okay. That student might still be able to practice with their brother or sister, or maybe they don't practice at home, but they do some extra practice at lunchtime with a friend when they come to school next week. So to me, augmentation is adding on extras. If I'm going to use technology as some kind of resource, it's a bonus resource where you can go to get extra support. But if a student doesn't have access to that technology, it's not going to be a critical problem, right? Let's say I have a class WhatsApp group, but not every family is in that group. I can make my announcements like no class on Friday to that group, but I also am going to have to send some kind of paper announcement slip home with all the students. And in that same way, technology augmentation can be a bonus resource to share, to create added opportunities. I think that's a really important thing to think about, because on the one hand, I don't want any of my students feeling like they're missing out on an opportunity because of any kind of situation at home, right? Especially when it's technology and it's a financial situation. I don't want a student feeling like they're disadvantaged because their family can't afford to have a computer in the house, right? But at the same time, I don't want my students who have access to that resource to get no access to that resource because another person can't access that resource. So those are kind of the two voices I think of balancing. And the answer in my head to how do I balance those is augmentation. How can I create technology as this bonus space? Everything you need is right there inside the classroom, right? Or on the paper worksheet that I put into everyone's backpack. But if you'd like, there's some extra material you might be able to access if you're willing to use the technology. I like to make those opt-in moments, especially when I'm in low resource environments. And that's to me what draws me to this layer of substitution and augmentation together. I'd say if you're a teacher teaching in a low resource environment and you are thinking, technology is nice, but I don't have technology that my whole classroom could use at the same time. Or I can't send a video to all of my students and expect them to watch it at home. If those are some of your realities, then I would say as you're integrating technology, substitution and augmentation is what's going to work for you, right? Those are going to be the way that you can integrate technology into your process of learning without excluding anyone. As we'll see when we go deeper into this framework to levels 3 and 4, everything further than this, technology is a necessary component, right? So if I'm going to do an activity at one of these deeper levels of integration, everyone in the classroom is going to need access to the technology at some point. That doesn't mean I necessarily need 30 iPads at the same time. We can still be creative with it. But again, I would say in low resource environments, I'm going to be thinking more of how can technology give me access to analog materials that I might not be able to access? Oh, I have free access to quality ebooks online. I can get great videos, download them onto my device, and take them to my school, which is in a rural valley where there's no internet at all, right? And so that process of substitution can serve a purpose there and can serve learning. Augmentation, where we're creating these extra bonuses, can help some of our students go further while not creating any moments that hold students back. And that's again why I recommend substitution and augmentation, low resource and practice. The third level of integration is modification. And that's when technology is used to significantly modify some aspect of learning, the process, the product, or the audience. For example, we can have students record an audio of themselves telling their mother they love them, and then taking a picture, making a slideshow for Mother's Day, right? Having that project in our classroom gives us something to practice Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, so that we can share it with our mom's brunch on Sunday. And when we get to this deeper level where now the what we're doing is different, that starts to really modify the process of learning, right? For example, I think about this. My students are telling their mother they love them, but they're doing it using a video. Well, when I was a child, I would do activities like this in school, but I would typically write something for my mom. My mom has a lot of like little framed like poems like, Mom, like, Julie, you are joyful, you are unbelievable, you are things that I would write about my mom. This gives a way to capture a child's voice, right? We can take this same process of making something to share with your mother, but now we can make it a speaking activity. So this is where, as a language teacher, technology is really modifying what I'm able to do, right? In this case, I've made a change to the product. What my students will create is different because of technology. Because we're making a video, I can tell them, oh, I want to practice every day. And then on the Friday, we're going to have the lights, we're going to do our hair beautiful, and we're going to make the final video. And so this process of rehearsal can be added in because we're working on a video. That might not be the same if it's just, you're going to color in this thing and it's all held on a piece of paper. So that's level 3, modification. One of the aspects of process, product, or audience changes. This is also a little different because it's getting home to mom, right? The final level of integration is redefinition. And this is when technology is really deeply integrated into the classroom, right? For me, this is something like Anna was sharing earlier, where technology is what students do before starting a new topic, in the middle of doing a topic, and at the end of a topic also, right? Where there's this ongoing process of using technology. Now, while I think this, and to an extent modification, are only possible in environments where you have class-wide access to technology, or at least enough devices that you can share, I think when you get to this level of integration, you get some really exciting possibilities. Because now the process, the product, and the audience are different. We're changing so much about this process of learning that it looks like something brand new. Here's one of my favorite apps I've found while researching for this presentation. It's called Goose Chase. Let me write that in chat so you can all look for it on your devices while I'm talking about it. So in Goose Chase, I can basically create a small private social media network just for a class of my students. I can create a list of photo scavenger hunts for my students to go on, and they can have to take pictures and upload them here, write in little comments, and like their friends' photographs. For instance, I could be teaching my students description words, right? Big, small, hard, soft. And then I could give them homework in the Goose Chase app and say, this weekend, you're going to take a picture of 4 of your toys. Take a picture of a big toy, a small toy, a soft toy, and a hard toy. And now all of my students over the weekend are interacting with their parent or an older sibling to use a device at home, take a picture of, este toy es big. And then they take a picture of it. And then with their parents' help or their older brother's help, write my big toy. And then they can click on their friends' pictures and like them. And now we're creating this thing where the language students are learning in the classroom is language they're using to connect with their family members at home. We're creating a real communicative challenge for English to be something that they share with their parents, which is what so many of my preschool parents want, right? So often I get preschool parents coming to me and saying, how do I make my child speak English to me? Well, integrating technology at this deep level might bring about that space because the child needs the parent's support to access the device. The parent can rely on the child's English to do the task. Ah, mi amor, ¿qué significa big toy? Ah, significa un juguete grande, right? And now we can start to create that shared space where the parent gets to observe their child's learning, which for all parents is a joy, right? I also see how this redefines the process of learning because while students are practicing English, they're also having this safe, controlled environment and moment to practice using social media with a parent, right? And I think myself thinking about having kids, that's a topic that gives me anxiety, right? How am I going to help a child grow up so that the way that they connect with social media is healthy for themselves? And so I think creating this moment and starting young, where our 3 and 4-year-old students are talking about that with their parents, talking about it with their teachers, right? Learning the lesson of, oh, these are nice things to say and these are not nice things to say when we're talking to people on the phone. Those can be a lot of the foundational skills of the bigger skill of digital literacy as well. So modification and redefinition are really powerful things, right? We start changing one or more elements of the process, product, or audience of learning. And getting access to something, right? Maybe I'm going to use, I have a friend who teaches in another country, and we're going to create virtual pen pals. And so I'm going to have access to a new audience, and my students will be able to write letters to friends from another country using their English. And their friends speak an African language, but they don't speak Spanish. So English becomes the bridge. When I can get to these deeper levels of modification and redefinition, really powerful learning can result. Now, remember the catch is, at this level, I need to come up with some clever way for every student to have access to the technology. Now, I might not have a classroom set of technology. So maybe that means I have each table working together, and my classroom has 3 tablets, or a computer here, and a computer here. And I create tasks that are collaborative, where several students are sharing one piece of technology, right? If I can create a situation like that, I can get to these higher levels of modification and redefinition. Or another alternative might be, maybe this moment of technological learning, I'm going to make one of the centers in center time. And so students can come to me in a group of 4 or 5, and the only technology I have in the class is my own tablet. I've worked in classrooms where that's the case. And I've found that making myself a small group where I can facilitate the technological learning around my device and bring 3 or 4 students to do something collaboratively has let me get into these layers of technology integration, of modification and redefinition, without needing a classroom set. So those are my thoughts on that. Does anyone have any questions about these layers of SAMR? Or alternatively, as we started, I invited you to do some window shopping. Which of these levels do you think is where you most often are in terms of integrating technology? Do you think the way you use technology is substitution mostly, augmentation, modification, or redefinition? Which of these do you think would fit best with you and your context? I teach online, so all of my students have to have a computer to show up. So I tend to think of myself mostly in that modification and redefinition realm. Now, that doesn't mean I go crazy with everything, right? I will still say that when I'm teaching online, I try to use Zoom and maybe 2 or 3 other apps, but that's it. I don't want to be using a million different things. I've found that I like to use one or two different tools, but then really deeply integrate them, right? And so the way that I get that deep integration of modification or redefinition is by using the really interactive features of Zoom, or finding some clever new way to use Jamboards or something. In the chat, Betsua and Mylene are sharing that that substitution and augmentation seem like what's going to fit in their classrooms.
I think that in the classroom, it may be substitution and also augmentation. But if I have the opportunity of assigning some tasks at home, I know that they can get the devices or the technology. So maybe redefinition, for example, to create their own videos.
And I think you muted and didn't come back off of mute.
Maybe role-playing situation and recording themselves, like recording TikTok videos or something like that.
I like that point you bring up too, that there might be one depth of these that works for me in the classroom and a different depth that works at home, right? The place where students might have the most access to technology is at home. And so maybe I can have these really cool homework assignments that are redefining what homework is. Whereas in the classroom, we just lean into, we're in the same physical space. We're just going to be face to face and not use tech. And I think that's another cool way to approach technology as well, right? To make the asynchronous distance part of face-to-face learning more interactive and lean into the resources students have at home. Alrighty, y'all. So first off, I promise I won't dwell on this. I think this is something that's at most of our fingertips and on the tips of most of our tongues. But technology is incredibly relevant, right? Something that always grounds me when I'm thinking about being a teacher in this system, and a lot of the ideals that MEP has set forth, is this idea of global citizenship, right? And really making sure we're taking a time to stop and think, as I'm teaching English to 3 and 4-year-olds, what am I doing to prepare them to be a citizen of tomorrow's world, right? And I feel like that's a really big question and really tiny students, but I think technology is one of the ways that connection is made, right? I think a skill that is necessary in order to fully participate as a global citizen in today's day and age is digital literacy, right? I think about how it's access to so much, right? And how research shows that purposeful use of interactive media can benefit learning, right? So if you're still on the fence and you're still like, I don't know, it's not, science shows it. If the teacher has a purpose for using technology and that purpose connects to learning, that technology can support learning and do more, right? And so I think that we do owe it to our students to find some ways for them to be developing digital literacy, right? As they're with us, how we can be modeling those types of skills. At the same time, I feel a balance and a pull in the other direction. Because as I was researching for this webinar, I also found studies that associated overall screen time with childhood obesity, right? So we can see a connection between children who spend more time looking at screens and who are less physically active and physically fit. There's also correlative data connecting a rise in technology use and a lowering of social emotional development, right? So I think of these two forces as kind of a push-pull balancing me, and me having to find balance in the center of them. I need to help these young learners grow up to be digitally literate, right? I want them to be global citizens. And so by the time they mature into adulthood, I want them to have developed sustainable and healthy ways to participate in our digital society. And I need to make sure that that path is also sustainable in terms of their health, right? And so I want to think about that through this concept of leaning back and leaning in, and thinking about how our position with technology can really highlight where our head and our body and our heart is at. So I'm going to put this forward. I think to serve purposeful learning, technology cannot be aimless leaning back. I think sometimes when I'm interacting with my devices, I'm leaning back and I'm scrolling and I'm just letting the internet come at me, right? The great show of everything all at once, flying right at my face. And it's nice. I get a lot of relaxing energy from this, or at least I think I do. I think to serve purposeful learning, this is not how technology interaction can be in the classroom or in the process of learning. I think learners need a specific task to pull them in and interact with technology, right? Interact with the technology, interact with their peers, and also interact with the world all around them, right? So I really want to make sure that I'm giving specific purpose to this. Now, let's say I have a classroom set of tablets, and all of those tablets have access to this great math app. Well, if it's time for math, I don't want to just say, okay, everyone, take out your apps, open the math app, and play. I need to give a little bit more guidance in that, right? I need to create some kind of system like, okay, you're going to get one sticker for every unit you complete in the next 10 minutes of time using the app, right? Create some guidance or structure to move students forward through completing new units or choosing specific topics and setting tasks, right? And taking that position to lean into learning comes when there's a purpose that pulls me forward. I think this type of lean in use of technology is where students are going to be developing digital literacy, the ability to interact with technology and others, while avoiding these challenges of technology as escape from others or technology as a substitution for movement. And so I like to think about that balance there. I'm leaning in to interact with technology and others. That's why I would almost argue that in the younger learner space, creating moments where technology is shared can be a really nice thing, right? Oftentimes with students that young, they're not going to be self-sufficient on a device. They're going to run into tech challenges and you're going to have to be there to help them through it. So these are already going to have to be more facilitated moments of your class where you have more of your active attention ready. And so when I'm there, I can add on this level of pro-social learning of let's all share this one device. Let's decide together what's the next game we're going to play. And now the draw to play this interactive game is also a draw to learn the skills of connecting with one another. If I have 4 tablets for those same 4 children and they can just play whatever game they want individually, they might get a little bit more time with the vocabulary, but they're going to completely miss out on that layer of interacting with one another. And to me, that's one of the things I'm thinking about in terms of sustainable technological play. That technology isn't something I do to escape everybody else entirely. That it's something I do with others. Yesterday, I was in the supermarket and there was a child who was accompanying his mother. His mother was grocery shopping and the child had a Nintendo Switch. And the child was not in that supermarket. Their body was, but their head was in the world of Minecraft. And as I said, excuse me, they didn't hear me. Hey, disculpe, they didn't hear me. As I started to push him aside, he didn't even feel me. His mom had to shove him aside to let me get past, right? And so I think about that. And I think also too about myself. And this is something that's really affected me, especially in the preschool classroom. I think there's a huge weight on me when I'm in that class with those students to not be modeling, leaning back, and looking at my phone and just scrolling through it. Even if on my end, I know these are messages from my boss, I need to read this for today's class, I'm also thinking that, like Vygotsky and Elkinen were saying earlier, children are learning how to behave by watching older people. And so every time my students see me and how I'm interacting with my technology, even if it's not a teachable moment, it's a learnable moment. They're learning that from me. And so I know the children I teach are going to see tons of modeling of adults doing this, of adults putting this barrier up between themselves and other people. And so I also think that if you're thinking that your biggest challenge to tech is, well, I'm only ever going to have one device in my classroom, I think that can be one of your biggest assets, because I think it forces you to be in this collaborative sharing space with technology, where the technology is at the center of a group of students interacting. Like how the Lego bridge that these students are building here, that kind of technological toy pulls students into the same moment. And I think when not enough technology creates that pull, we have the type of need for collaboration that's going to bring about a lot of positive learning for our young learners. Alrighty. So now I want to get into thinking about screening as a skill. And I have some discussion questions here. I'd love to hear from y'all in chat. And feel free to unmute and share ideas out loud as well. So again, I want to think about another big question for our small learners. Where in school can children learn the skills of sustainable screening that will help them become global citizens? What are your thoughts on that? Think about your students, your institutions.
Like where in the classroom, for example, that's what you mean, Matt?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes, I think that in the classroom, in the playground, I don't know. Maybe we're not used to seeing children here with cell phones in primary school, at least. That's not very common. But if they do use it, it's in the classroom.
So I know with young learners, this question's a little bit different. My experience has been from weekend classes. And so I would sometimes have younger learners bringing a cell phone to school. Now, maybe it was mom or dad's old cell phone that was broken and barely worked, but it was still the presence of something like that. I know some teachers' approach to technology, and especially the phone in the pocket, is to prohibit it, 100% banned. I try to avoid that, at least as a starting position, right? I think one of the skills that's necessary in this broader skill of being a member of our digital global society is resisting the call, right? Knowing my phone's over here, hearing that it buzzes and there's something calling my attention out of the present moment, but being able to remain here with you all in this call is a skill that I'm practicing still, but it's a skill that's going to help me find peace and presence. And so I think too that as we're bringing technology into the classroom environment, I think this is one of the questions that's going to lead us to a lot of the bonus learning that's going to come, right? So for instance, I found that with my young learners who would bring phones to their Saturday and Sunday English classes, rather than saying, put them in the box, kids, I don't want to see any of that stuff here, right? If I did that, 0 distractions, 0 problems, but also 0 learning about sustainable screening. If I tell those students, all right, I want your phone out and I want it flat on the table, and you're only allowed to use it with your phone flat on the table. And you're allowed to use your phone to translate words, to write notes in a notes app on your phone, or to look up pronunciation, right? Those are the 3 things you're allowed to do right now. Maybe I have a box up in the corner of my whiteboard, and or a little cell phone that I draw. And whatever I put in that box, that's what you're allowed to do with a phone right now. We take a test, I write nothing, because right now there's nothing you can do with your phone. To me, creating that space is where these skills are going to start being modeled and where we can also start to have conversations about them, right? And so I think those spaces are going to be very important. With younger learners, that might be negotiating how much time we're going to spend with the iPads, right? I think that's a real big challenge that a lot of children at this age struggle with. And I think you can use some of your authority as teacher figure to help parents with a conversation that they're also struggling with at home, right? And set up a guideline and say, okay, kids, we're going to go outside to our school garden and we're going to read books for 10 minutes. And then after we've been outside learning for 10 minutes, then we're going to come inside and use the iPads for 10 minutes, right? And create moments where you're modeling these skills of sustainable screening as well, right? This might be one of those topics. As I was writing this slide, I was thinking about like that voice I hear often, which is, isn't this the parent's job? Right? And that might be something you're thinking or feeling right now here. Why is it my job to teach children what's appropriate behavior with a phone? Here's my take on it. That child who I almost had to step over in the grocery store to do my grocery shopping, well, I've been in that grocery store before, and I've been totally lost in my phone. And like I just told you, children learn by observing the adults around them. So if my neighbor's child has been in the grocery store and watching me do this, and has learned from my example that it's okay to be at the grocery store and do this, I can't expect a 5-year-old to go, it's different when he's on his phone because he's an adult with responsibilities, but I'm just a child with Minecraft. No, that's cognitively the same thing for a 5-year-old, right? So I think I have to take on some of the responsibility that I know I'm guilty of being in public and modeling the kind of disconnection that I don't want to see from my students. So I know if I'm putting some of this energy out into the world, I also need to find some of my facilitable space as a teacher and explore what the other side looks like, right? What these long-term ways of integrating technology into our life that are sustainable look like. So now I want to think more specifically about the skill of screening. My question for you all is the following. What are some of the sub-skills of screening? And I'm using screening as kind of a play on words, thinking of the skill of using technology, the skill of using a screen as a helpful learning device, right? The skill of leaning in and remaining active, not leaning back and becoming passive. Now, Anna already shared one of these earlier, and so I'm going to throw her idea onto the board. If you want to share anything more about it, you're welcome to. But earlier, Anna was thinking about critical thinking. And I think absolutely, as students are learning to use technology and are learning while using technology, they're also going to be developing critical thinking, right? They accidentally hit the home button. Oh no, I broke it. The frog disappeared. Hay un botón con un rana. It opens. Lo arreglé, right? On a basic level, finding their own way through tech problems is going to be developing the starting of critical thinking skills. What are other sub-skills that come along with screening and digital literacy? For me, another one is just literacy, right? Being able to read and write means the way that you can interact with a piece of technology increases exponentially. One of the things that's really interesting to me is when I think about the difference here is that in old school analog literacy, we've got writing. In new school, we've got typing. And especially with this young learner age, there's something really interesting for me to notice here. The mechanics of holding this thing and squishing my wrist just right and holding everything and not wiggling it and the paper and this is hard, right? For any of you who work with an age of students where you've taught them to write, you know this is way harder than you remember it. But for me to form a perfect K, I just have to go like this. And if I want to do it again, I just do this. Any one of you has watched a 3 or 4-year-old grab a phone and touch the button of the game they want to play. So the dexterity of touching a button on a screen to input a letter, typing is actually easier than writing as a physical skill. Now, as a cognitive process, I'm making no claims, but I think there's a really powerful way that typing can serve as a pre-literacy skill to help students develop their literacy with a pen and paper. My partner has been working in first grade all year, and she's found this. She's found that when students need to type something into their app, and she can give them a Post-it note with their name, and they have to look at their name written here and then touch the buttons here, it's a controlled practice activity in letter recognition, right? So even your students who might not be able to read and write yet can still interact with keyboard-based activities in a really simple way and be developing pre-literacy through that. Colin
Yes,
also adds in the chat. Oh, yeah.
sorry. I think it's also literacy related to reading, but in a non-linear way, because I can see that in children that they can read non-linearly by clicking on some links or I don't know, even by skipping the ads. Even though they don't know how to read or they can't read, they can recognize functions on the screen and how to move from one website to a different one by seeing the colors. Maybe if they see something blue, they know that is the link, so that they can move on to a different screen or a different text or picture. So I think that is interesting in relation to literacy. And also this question of looking for information responsibly. For example, by using YouTube Kids, and they know that, for example, in the case of my children, they use that one and they know why it is not prohibited, but the reasons why we prefer them to use YouTube Kids and not the regular YouTube. And it has to do with this question of knowing how to use or where to look for information that is appropriate for their age.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that links back to what Colton was sharing, that idea of digital citizenship. Like in that idea I was thinking of earlier, where students are going on and doing photo challenges and they can comment on each other. If I do that activity with a group of 5-year-olds, at some point, someone's going to go in there and comment and just write, "Es feo." It's going to happen. Like, they're kids. It's going to happen. And I look at that and think, great, right? This is the moment I want to explore. This is a moment where as a classroom, we can look and say, "Oh, Tony, how did that make you feel when Ricardo said "es feo" underneath your toy?" Me hizo sentir mal. Like, exploring that moment, I think, can let children in the safety of a preschool classroom see, what does it mean to talk to other people on the internet? right? This is a real thing, that in the same way that our 3 and 4-year-olds have to learn that my words affect the emotions of someone when I can see them, they also have to learn the skill of my words affect the emotions of someone else when I can't see them, right? Those are other important learnings that we want to tie in here. One of the things that I think is really powerful and important about the way that technology has been integrated in my local school district here in San Antonio is that from very early on, online safety is something that all elementary school teachers are talking about with all children, right? And I think these are important conversations that as adults helping children come into the world, we want to have, right? If I'm inviting students to go home and use a camera to take pictures of things, we also have to have the conversation of, don't take a picture of like people who don't know they're in the picture, right? Don't take a picture of your address. Maybe don't take a pic. Like, what are the online safety skills we want to start teaching from a young age, right? And so again, I think, like Anna is saying, if we go to the wider internet, it's not a safe space, right? It isn't all coded over in soft things and ready for children to bounce around. And so a lot of these platforms of integrating technology into the young learning space are where we can create these safe gardens for our students to explore these ideas as well. So first, I want to think about receptive screening. In the same way that I think of English productively and receptively, I want to think, what are the skills I can develop when my students are screening receptively? Now, this is a big space where I'm thinking about leaning back and leaning in. I think if you just put on a video and let your students watch it and that's it, I think it's not very interactive, receptive screening, right? The same way that if you just get out a storybook, open it and read it to the students, start to finish without stopping, it's not a very interactive experience, right? At that point, when I find myself doing that, I think I'm just being a bad TV show, right? They're just watching my body and hearing this or seeing a tiny screen, and I want to make something more interactive than that to get the students to lean forward. So when I'm thinking about developing the skill of receptive screening, I'm thinking about setting a specific task that my students are looking and listening for. For example, I might log into the ABC Mouse portal, where I get lots of free resources as a MEP teacher, and find a nice interactive story video, or maybe it's just a video, 3-minute video of a fairy tale. And then I might think, okay, I'm going to design a pre, during, post lesson around this video. First, we're going to prepare with some of the vocabulary words. Then we're going to watch the video 3 times. The first time we're going to watch to find out, where is the boy going? The second time we're going to watch, we're going to ask ourselves, what does the boy do to prepare to fight the dragon? And the third time we watch, we're going to watch to find out, how does the boy defeat the dragon? And then afterwards, my students are going to do a role play where they fight the dragon. Something like that, right? Where instead of just putting on the video, hitting play, and hoping learning happens, I want to create some reason for the students to stop. Another example of this might be, there were some videos I liked that were about colors. I think they were from, and different colors would pop up. And I would pause the video at specific times and ask the students, what do you see that is pink? The video didn't ask that question. I added that question in, right? I took a video and added in moments of interaction. And I think that's the thing I would say is important with receptive screening. If you're going to have your students just watch videos, I think it's important to give some kind of task that goes along with it. Because if there's no task, some of your students are going to be pulled in just by watching that video. But some students are going to fade away. They're going to lean so far back they fall out of the activity and out of focus. And so that's my big tip around receptive screening and the development of receptive screening skills. Mylene says she agrees. She likes to pause the video and ask questions. I like that, Mylene. The one thing I would add that has helped me with asking questions is I like to prepare my students with questions before they watch the video, right? I find when I give a student a question before watching the video, they're listening and looking with a specific purpose. ¿Dónde va el niño? ¿Dónde va el niño? And when it comes to the time where the boy goes somewhere, they're focusing, este es lo que necesito, este es lo que necesito. And so asking the question before the video guides them during the video. So I'll ask them before and then repeat the question again afterwards, right? And that way too, we can even watch a video multiple times, and every different time, okay, now I want you to watch and tell me how many of each fruit, right? Okay, they're gonna watch the video once and say, which fruits does the family eat? And then they're gonna watch a video the second time and say, how many of each fruit? And so the second time you play the video, they're going 1, 2, 3, 3 apple. 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 orange apple. And they're playing that game in their head too. Alrighty, on to the next skill, connecting with that broader skill of technology and creativity that Colton was sharing. I'm thinking about productive screening. How can technology create a medium of expression for young learners, right? This was an interesting question to ask myself, because when I think about what I produce with technology, it's mostly with this. And while I think there's some space for students to do some pre-literacy activities with a keyboard, I also think I don't want to go too deeply into writing. I know that's not MEP's focus, and I also know I believe that writing is a secondary skill that kind of follows the speaking, especially in this second language environment. So one of the examples I'm thinking about is using a free application to make comic books, right? I opened up the App Store on my tablet and searched comic book maker. And I scrolled past all the ones that cost $5 because I didn't want to pay $5. And then I found one that was free and I downloaded it and it worked great. I don't know why you'd ever pay $5 for all those other ones. And so this was a quick example I made up of imagining how could my students create a short comic book? I could see this being a teacher-supported group project. Maybe 5 students come to my table during center time and I say, okay, I'm gonna hold the camera, but you all are going to imagine a story together. Okay, what's the beginning of the story? And they act it out and I take a picture. Okay, what's the middle of the story? We act it out, we take a picture. What's the end of the story? And then in this app, it was just click, 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 click. Again, you've seen these young learners figure out these buttons, right? So I like this app, I think it was just called Comic Maker, because it was very, very visual. And I even imagined, could I let my students use emojis to type what the people are saying? In this story, I'm imagining that Gael is there and he calls up Dakel and he says, it's my birthday, come to the party. But then off in the corner, Isabella hears and she calls Isaac and she says, hey, there's gonna be a party. And then everyone in the class is talking, there's a party, there's a party, there's a party, there's a party. And that's how everybody got invited to Gael's birthday party. So doing something like this, first I could have my students brainstorm a story together, take pictures of their story, and then during story time, maybe they could all take turns speaking their story to the rest of the class. I hold the tablet and they point to the pictures while the class listens to them speak a story. And now using technology to create this visual artifact leads to a speaking and listening activity where one student speaks and the rest of the class listens. Can you think of any other activities you've done with young learners that have gotten them into productive screening that you'd like to share? One of the other things I've done that I've loved is, I don't know if you've had this experience, but I have, where there's a 5-year-old doing the cutest thing in the world. They're just like speaking perfect English and they're saying it, it's super funny. And you're like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna take a video to send to his mom. You pull out the camera, and as soon as your camera's up, the child just goes, and they stop what they're doing. They're terrified. They're so nervous. They can't do anything in front of the camera, which I think that's also its own cutest thing. I've found that recently, one of the updates I did on my phone gave me this new feature where when I'm taking a selfie video, it can put like a digital mask over my face. So now instead of seeing my face, you see a chicken or you see an elephant. And I've loved having students record a video of themselves talking and just like, okay, you're gonna look and say like, hello, my name is Mariela the elephant. And when they look in the camera and they don't see their face, to me, it's almost like this digital version of wearing a costume. And just as with a box full of costumes, I might get my students feeling less nervous because they don't feel like themselves. Using that filter to cover a face and recording a selfie video where you don't see your face, with some students, that can help them get around the nerves of being recorded. And I also think it kind of creates a fun reason to, okay, now let's all say something as the tiger. And we can, again, take turns. This is something I could facilitate just with one piece of technology up at the front, but we could rotate through it. In chat, Colton shares his idea for a productive screening activity. And his idea is using an app called Book Creator and also Flipgrid Video. That's fun. One of the strategies for making books that I've always liked is you could use an app like that. And let's say I have the Book Creator app on my iPad and I'm creating a book with ideas from the class. And I elicit every idea. Okay, and where do they go next? Do they go to the supermarket? Do they go to the bank? Or do they go to the pet store? Okay, we vote. Everyone says pet store. Okay, what pet do they get at the pet store? Is it a dog? Is it a cat? Is it a bird? I'm hearing everyone say dog. He's gonna get a dog. So they could go through that and you could be eliciting ideas into your team book, right? And you could send that book home to the students and their homework could be create the final page on their own. Or in class, they could do it where every student gets to develop their own end. I've done that with a story where we go to the pet store and then right before the family makes the decision of what pet to get, we stop and then everybody gets to create their own final page of the book. They could do that on their own iPad or they could just do it on paper, right? And that way everyone gets to kind of make their decision at the end and feel happy. And it's also a way of balancing a moment of shared collaboration around technology and dispersed analog involvement. Cool. Any other ideas around productive screening? Or are we ready for the next slide? So another thing I'm thinking about is this skill of connected screening. And it's something I've been mentioning a lot, but it's this idea of using technology between people, right? Rather than one device, one person, breaking that mold. And I think it's a really powerful mold where even if I was in a classroom where I had one tablet for every child, I would not always use one tablet with every child, right? I've never taught in a class with that much tech. One can dream. But even if I could, I would still find time to do some of this connected screening, right? Because I want to think about how can screen time be a shared experience where that same kind of negotiating, sharing, and turn taking that makes playing on the playground a beneficial learning environment that Vygotsky was watching. How can I make that same environment happen with technology? I need technology to be shared at some points so that that negotiating and turn taking and sharing can also be developed in this area as well, right? For example, one of the apps that my partner has had most success with her young learners is Kahoot. She's found that with her first graders who spent most of the year pre-literate, she was able to design interactive quizzes and games that students could answer just using colors, symbols, and numbers, and not having to read at all. And also, students could play in teams and do versions of competitions where their teams would earn points and then use the points to buy territory in this group competition. And so they're doing this critical thinking and problem solving as they play a strategic game, and also this language practice as they play Kahoot. Now, this is also something I might be able to facilitate. Let's say at home, I have my old phone and the battery only lasts like an hour. And I haven't thrown it away. It's still nice. The screen's a little bit cracked, but it's there just in case. Well, I might be able to put out a message to some friends of mine and say, hey, does anyone have an old phone that barely works that you'd be willing to donate? And if I could get 4 people, right, just 4 old broken phones, all I need to do is connect them to Wi-Fi and download one app. And now each table in my classroom has a controller and we can play Kahoot, right? I can have the main screen here up with my computer that I hold. Or alternatively, let's say one of my challenges is half of my students have cell phones and the other half don't. Well, I can say, all right, today I need 4 leaders who have cell phones to volunteer. They stand up. Okay, sit at each of the 4 tables. Now the rest of the students, I'm going to count you off. 1, 2, 3, 4. And you're going to sit with those students, right? And again, we get into this interesting environment where Brian, who's brought his cell phone, has to recognize that he's sharing it and the team is making a decision. Now again, I think if I try that, there's going to be a moment where Brian goes, hey, es mi celular, yo puedo decidir. And that's going to stir up this type of interaction where I want to say, no, Brian, it is your phone, but right now you're sharing it with the team. So every decision has to be the team decision. Isa's sharing in chat that she uses Kahoot and it's a total success and they love it. One of the things I like about Kahoot as well is in the class, Kahoot can be this deeply integrated modification, right? Your controlled practice activities can become this interactive game show. And then at home, it can be an augmentation. If students want to do extra practice, you can send them the link and they can keep playing at home. So the other thing I like about an app like Kahoot is that I can have different opportunities. Okay, on Monday, we're going to do this with it. On Tuesday, we're going to do this with it. And at home, there's optional extra homework if a student wants to play more. And I send out the link to families and say, hey, this isn't homework, but if your students finish and you want to give them something educational on your tablet instead of just letting them watch silly videos, let them play with this, right? And now I'm also collaborating with that parent to say, hey, here's something safe to hand your child on your phone that's going to stimulate them and help them grow. Alrighty, 2 more. Next up, in terms of our screening sub-skills, I want to think about supported screening. I want to think, what are ways that we can use technology to support what we're doing in the real world? To me, this is an important skill because I think it connects with that connection between screen time and obesity. I want to make sure that I'm not introducing technology to young learners as a replacement for interaction in the real world. And so I want to find time where what we're using digitally is supporting what we're doing in the physical world. One of the resources you'll find on our resource site at the end of our webinar is this great app called Preschool Data Text Toolbox. And this app is a completely visual interface. It's designed for students who cannot read. And it basically turns a tablet into a scientific data collection device, right? Let's say you want your students to do a survey. What is the favorite fruit of our class? Go around and ask your classmates and record your answers here. Maybe your students have a pet, right? They get a little pet. When I was a student, we had like little worms, like moths that were going to then make cocoons. They were silkworms and then transform into butterflies. So we could measure every day how many leaves did the worm eat on Monday? 2 leaves. How many leaves did the worm eat on Wednesday? 3 leaves. How many did he eat on Friday? 5 leaves. How about on Saturday? He became a butterfly, right? So now I could use an app like this, and even if I just have one device for the classroom to share, this digital tool is supporting what we're doing in the real world. And I think that that in tandem function there is a space I want to explore more as an educator, right? Showing that it's not this either or, but this rich integration, I think, that provides a lot of power there. Are there any other tools you think that are prime for a student to use on? The other one I can think of a lot is like a camera. I think taking pictures and recording pictures is something students could do a lot of, which is what really drew me to Goose Chase and how it takes the tool of using a camera and creates the interaction of language and sharing. Can you think of other tools that are able to be accessed through technology that can help young learners? Scanning QR codes, absolutely, right? It's so funny to think about. I think about how much like older folks like can struggle. Like even myself, I see a QR code sometimes and I'm like, just bring me the menu. Don't make me scan a code. I'm hungry, man. Right? But a child, you show them that, they're like, something fun's over there. I'm gonna do it. And so again, how we can use that mode, right, to get around the limitation of student literacy skills. Nice. One of the other tools I know my partner was suggesting that she used was the voice to text feature, right? And so she had her students practice pronunciation by holding up their tablet and hitting the microphone where they would dictate speech and going, hello, my name is Daniel, and then showing it to her, and she would check and go, they know it, and they had to keep practicing saying the word very clearly. Ophelia is also sharing that word wall could be a tool for supported screening, right? Sites like WordWall or other vocabulary collection sites, I think can be a really nice resource, especially when I think about how I think there are a lot of parents out there who might like to help their children learn English, but maybe don't know how, right? I think one of the interesting things about teaching a skill that's an additional language is if you're teaching preschool math, most people know preschool math, right? That's a skill everyone has. But even with just preschool level second language, a preschooler could potentially learn more about a second language than someone else in their family who's much older, right? So being able to share these resources with home, like I create a tool like WordWall that helps me in the classroom, but also could be a tool that parents use at home with their students, I think is a great way to connect and support families who want to help their students and maybe don't know how. Alrighty, the last skill I want to talk about today in terms of our sub-skills of screening as a skill is resilient screening. My question is, how can we help young learners begin developing the type of critical thinking and creative problem solving necessary for digital literacy? This is the skill that my grandmother does not have. My grandmother knows how to use her computer for 4 very specific things. And if an update comes and one button that she needs moves from here to here, the computer's broken. And she cannot do one of those 4 things until my mom goes to her house to help her, or until I call her on the phone and talk her through the problem, right? And I think about how that process of adapting to things changing is something that's become an even greater reality of the digital world, right? When I'm interacting in an analog world, if I learn how to drive to work, every day I follow that same path, right? Very rarely does that change. Maybe once every couple of years, there's some construction and I have to take a detour. But for the most part, my analog world is more predictable in that sense. Or if I'm going to see a change, I see it coming from far away. Whereas in this digital space, the process of how to do something could change, right? Right before I go online in Zoom, a new update could come out and move all the buttons. And so myself as a teacher, I could be completely lost. And I need to be resilient in that moment. How can I stay focused and use critical thinking and problem solving to overcome the changing pathways, right? Now, if you use technology in the classroom, it will disobey you, I promise. The technology will not always work perfectly. You'll have bumps and problems here and there. We all do, right? And I think that's just a result of having your attention on the students and only partially being with the tech. I think those moments are especially important in preschool, because just like I was saying that our students are going to learn a lot about us for the amount of time they spend watching us do this, our students are going to learn a lot about interacting with tech, seeing how we handle things not working right. Oh, okay, now we have to find this button. That's okay, we're gonna keep at it, right? I think it's even more important for those preschoolers to watch you problem solve. And in the same way that if I've got a preschooler who can't tie their own shoes, I might need to tie their shoes because we're going to lunch and everyone else is waiting. I might not have time on a random Tuesday to teach Dylan to tie his shoes. But I am going to be saying, primero los orejas de conejito, los cruzo y jalo y ya, right? I'm going to keep giving that input so that one day Dylan can do that on their own. So if my student's using an iPad and they're like, teacher, no funciona, I want to make sure I'm showing them the screen and narrating my process of fixing it. Because even if that student doesn't learn how to fix the problem, they're seeing modeled, when the technology doesn't work, my teacher stays focused and fixes it. I can do that too. They're learning from you. Another tip to pull from my partner's classroom that I loved, whenever she's working with technology, she's implemented a rule. Any student who needs technology help has to ask 3 friends how to solve the problem first. And if all 3 friends don't know how to fix it, then that student can come ask the teacher. I find that also promotes this culture of we can solve our own problems. We can help each other. We can be active and resilient as we're working through the problems of technology, right? And all in all, I think those are many ideas for how learners can develop productive, receptive, connected, supported, and resilient screening skills. So I want to get to our end here, give you some time for your questions, thoughts, inspirations. And I also want to share one more time our attendance and registration form. So I'm going to send that link out right now. If you haven't filled out the attendance, please, please, please do. We want to brag about you. We want to go to all of our partners and say, look, they gave time out of their day to come learn more about teaching. So if you fill out this registration form, I promise to brag about you. If you've already filled out your registration form, you're awesome. See, I'm already bragging about you. We will then like to ask you for the gift of some feedback for us. We'd love to hear what helped you learn today and what more questions you have. This is our final preschool specific focused webinar. So if there are more topics that you'd like support on in terms of working and helping learning in your preschool MEP classrooms, let us know in the feedback so that as our national and regional advisors are working on upcoming training opportunities, your curiosities can guide where we go as a community of learners. Last up, I want to share with you our resource site. We have compiled a wonderful list of extra resources to expand on all of this. So if I was clicking around here and I threw some information at you and you're like, that's cool, but you clicked by it so quickly, head on over to our resource site. We have all of the background information and more that went into today's presentation and the other webinars already here and sorted for you. You can find resources and in the future recordings of our first and second webinar. And right here, you can find all of the resources for today's webinar. You'll find a recording, a slideshow, virtual attendance, and then a collection of articles and videos all about this topic. So you can find out more about the SAMR model, about how to integrate technology in the preschool classroom, some do's and don'ts of devices, all that and more. Also, again, while you're at this page, feel free to click around and explore other webinars. Even if you're not a primary teacher, you can still click on the links. Maybe you've never taught Colegio. Why not? Try it. There's nothing secret. You're allowed to learn. Learning is free. It's for everybody. So find that resource link in our chat and feel free to explore here. Are there any questions, comments, or thoughts as we're wrapping up our webinar together here?
It's really interesting to see how we can go beyond learning just content related to the syllabus, but raising children for real life, because being global citizens is something they need to know because they are part of this new society, let's say.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think, at least I speak for myself in that I was growing up as a lot of this technology was growing up, right? I wasn't born into a world where all of this existed. As I've gotten older and more mature, technology has gotten older and more mature, right? So all of this kind of became a part of my life just naturally. But I think with this generation of children who's coming up today, they're being born into this highly connected digital world. And so I think there's a new opportunity for us as educators to be really intentional and help this amazing tool become a healthy part of students' lives, right? I always look at my iPad and think, this is the most incredible tool for productivity and the most incredible distraction machine ever made, right? And one of my big challenges as a human today is, how do I look at this and keep myself on the side of productive tool for learning and not always fall into the habit of incredible machine for distraction? And I think in the classroom is a really powerful space for us to explore. So thank you so much for all your questions, your comments, your ideas, and everything you've shared. Thank you for your time and your energy across this and all of our webinars. And remember, we've got more webinars coming up just because that was the end of our preschool series. Remember that coming up in later on in the month, all the way back up here, we've got 3 more webinars focused on teacher well-being, well-being in the classroom, and reflection and lesson planning. So if any of those topics sound interesting, mark your calendars, and we hope to see you there.
Thank you, Matt. And thank you, everyone, for inviting us.
Thank you so much,
Thanks so
Matt.
much for
Thank you,
coming
Anya.
For this shot of energy and motivation.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
So much, y'all. Have a good night.
Bye-bye. You. Have a good night.